Hello, everyone. Welcome to Forever Motoring. Today we have a great conversation with the amazing race car engineer Tino Belli, who has worked behind the scenes with some of the biggest names in racing. He was at Andretti for over 14 years. He was with March Engineering for 7 years. He's been the director of aerodynamic development at Indy Car for many years now, I think at least 8. And the list really goes on and on. He's really worked with the stars in the business, and he's really helped to create some of the best cars out there. I mean, he has 6 Indianapolis 500 victories, 6 IndyCar championships, 105 IndyCar victories. So it was really an honor to talk to him, a Welshman of Italian descent, as he likes to say. We talk about the stress behind the scenes of racing, how it can even be a little bit like PTSD at times if you don't find the right balance. We talk about his early life and how his sister sort of is responsible for why he became an engineer. He mentioned so many amazing people here, like Dan Weldon, who he was really close to before his crash in 2011, and Adrian Newey, and of course Robin Hurd, and so on. But we also talk about like the personal aspects of getting the best out of a racing team and the responsibility of those like him who are designing and making the cars, finding a way to balance beauty, speed, and safety. Definitely not an easy task and so important. We talk about, for example, like when it's a good idea to watch the accident videos and when not to watch them. Of course, just from his perspective, but it's pretty amazing to hear someone talk who's seen it all at these amazing races. And we talk about, of course, like the Indianapolis 500 and why it is such an important race and such a legendary event. We also talk about something, it's a little nerdy, but I really love this microtube heat exchanger that actually Tino helped design with Mezzo Technologies. He co-developed the whole thing back when he was with Andretti. It's really like all the cars are using it now, I think, at least at IndyCar. And it's very durable, which is what I'm getting to, because it has a low maintenance cost, it's got this great thermal performance, it's durable, and it's sustainable. I think some teams, IndyCar teams, are able to use one radiator for many, many seasons. So that's kind of where we get to in the conversation, how racing can become more sustainable, including like the ways that we make cars. And I find out some very interesting things about the IndyCar events that I didn't know about their fuel, that they've been running on biofuels for a very long time, for example. And also just the sustainability it didn't come as a sustainable decision. They weren't trying to be sustainable and deciding not to create new cars every season like they do in Formula One in terms of using cars, making cars, getting rid of parts. Tino offers some really interesting perspectives on it. One thing he says is that we should have the right to repair. So instead of thinking of cars as made of parts that we just use one season or one race and throw away, maybe there's a way to think of these as not something we want to throw away. But I'll let you listen and see what you think about that. It's a great conversation, and I'm really happy to bring it to you. And I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. All right, let's go. Hello, Tina. Thank you for being on Forever Motoring. It's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Andrea.
So I often start this podcast with a question about what first moved you. What's an early moment in your life when you remember being moved?
Well, as you can tell from my name, my family came from Italy, but I was born in South Wales. And coming from Italy, everybody's a bit of a car fanatic, so definitely was quite an influence. What really took me more into cars than anything else was as a child, a young teenager, my dream was actually always playing rugby for Wales, but I got a concussion at sort of about the age of 13, which kept recurring. So I was advised to stop playing rugby, and then my interest in motorsports increased at that point. Happened to just coincide with Formula One starting to play more regularly on the BBC. Up to that point, they only really covered the big races like Monaco, the British Grand Prix, and then Bernie Ecclestone came in and started covering every race, and so you could follow the series nicely. And that was the beginning of the end for me.
So you remember watching it or listening to it, or what was it
Yeah,
that kind of captivated you?
yeah. My dad was he liked cars, but wasn't very practical with cars. And I was very lucky that he used to let me, I always wanted to work on things and make things. And he used to let me service his cars for him, make mistakes, cost him money. But he was very forgiving for that. He realized that you learn by, doing things and making mistakes. So I just used to tinker with cars, watch the Formula One races on television. Coming from South Wales, the nearest racetrack back then was probably Thruxton or Silverstone, which was, Silverstone was a good 4 hours away. So couldn't get to go and see many races. South Wales is quite a strong rallying area, forest roads and things like that. So my earliest interest in racing was actually rallying. I used to compete in road rallies in the UK.
Oh, so you started driving early. I knew you build your own cars and race and things too, but
Yeah, so I got to the end of high school, and my sister, who's a lot more intelligent than me, she was in university studying medicine. She came home one Christmas and said, have you handed in your forms to go to university? I said, well, you can go to university. I didn't even consider it. And so she sat down with me, and my sister was very influential in my life. She was the one who taught me how to study. And she sat down with me and we completed all the forms. And first thing I said was, I don't think I'll do medicine like you. And she said, well, I don't think you'd like it because you don't like blood and all the rest of it. So she said, but you like cars, so why don't you study engineering? I said, oh, that sounds good. So let's do mechanical engineering. And she said, well, you don't want to do mechanical engineering because it's dirty and whatever. And she basically picked aeronautical engineering for me. As soon as she said it, it just it sparked a bell immediately, because at that point we're talking about the late 70s here. Ground effect was just come into Formula One. And they were starting to use wind tunnels to design moving ground wind tunnels to design race cars, and that's what prompted me to really want to push to try and get to Imperial College, because that's where the famous Lotus ground effect cars were designed.
So that was one of the things that made you want to go there. That makes sense, I guess.
Very much. I really did not understand the higher education system. I thought I was going to go and work with my dad in his fish and chip shop. So,
And that was fine, huh?
I hadn't considered higher education at all. So,
obviously your sister saw something about you. You must have been pretty good working on the cars and things like that already. There must have been something that she noticed in you, or maybe even just a passion or understanding of it.
Yeah, no, she definitely understood me more than anybody, probably even more than my teachers understood me. So
Is she older than you?
yeah, she's about 3.5 years older than me.
Okay. I'm also about 3 years older than my brother. And I definitely remember watching him growing up. So I can imagine she would see you in a way no one else would.
Yeah.
So that was a lucky start. It's not easy to get into Imperial College London, though, is it, for aeronautical engineering? So
Yeah, she picked it for me. I didn't really realize how good a school it was and how difficult it was. So yes, it was quite a shock when my first year there was very close to failure. Yeah, I didn't. Everybody else had done a lot more mathematics than me when I got there, and I ended up having to work very, very hard just to get through the first year. So they had like a 20% checkout rate in the first year. So you sort of got partway through the year, you're away from home for the first time, so you're having a good time. And then you realize, oh my gosh, maybe I really start knuckling down, and otherwise I'm going to be chucked out at the end of the first year. So,
did you have any really good teachers or professors or people that sort of inspired you, or was there, when you look back, is there some moment then that it provided some inspiration for what would become your own designs?
I remember my tutor, because I was really struggling, so we would get these tutorials and you have to come in with your answers. And one of the guys was one of the other students in the tutorial, was just a genius, and he'd answer all 7 questions, and I'd come in and say, well, I managed to answer 1. And so he sort of said, well, some of us have 3-amp fuses in our brain. Some of us have 13-amp fuses. 13 amps is a regular British fuse. 3-amp is a fuse where basically it blows really quickly and you can't do the work. And then he said some people have a piece of silver foil. And it's interesting because he was referring to the genius next to me, somewhat implying that maybe he was going to burn out. He implied that I was a 3-amp fuse and maybe I needed to work to be a 13-amp fuse.
I guess you understood that, huh? It made sense to you.
An interesting analogy. So
Yeah,
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 it sort of made me realize that there's a balance in life. You have to work hard to get where you want to be, but make sure you don't do it at all costs. There's still family and friends, and having fun is important as well as just working. And as you get older, you start to realize how important that is.
yeah. I mean, it sounds like maybe having that skill or noticing that early on would be good for the race environment too, because, well, it seems like something you could take too seriously, but at the same time, it also seems like it's about teamwork in a way, which might require a little bit of that kind of easing of pressure that you were just mentioning.
Yeah, very high pressure environment. There's no doubt about it. And my first boss in racing, Robin Hurd, he always said you got to make sure that you have fun in racing, because if you don't have fun, it's too hard. It's too many hours, and it'll just drag you down. It's
Yeah,
you can get yourself to the point where really you can have PTSD. The
yeah, I can imagine.
stresses can get that high that I'm sure that a number of not only engineers but mechanics, I worked with a mechanic at March who moved into the wind tunnel department, because obviously my background was aerodynamics. And I asked him, I said, well, why did you give up being a race mechanic? And he said that he was just getting too stressed about whether he remembered that had he done this bolt up, had he assembled this part correctly.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Because back then and today, especially here at the Indianapolis 500, one small error it's close to being a life and death decisions.
Yeah.
And yes, that can certainly create a lot of stress in your lives.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean,
You've got
well,
to
I wanted to
balance
talk
that
to you
out.
about that. I guess before we go there, we can go there, but how did you get from being at Imperial College London to actually working with people like the ones you've just described, or Andretti, or I mean, like that seems like a huge dream, right? For people who are studying design and aerodynamics to then be actually in
Yeah,
this environment. How did that happen?
yeah, absolutely correct. I went into university with the dream. I did want to get into racing. While I was in university, I competed in the road rallying in the UK with my road car. And rallying actually did have quite an influence in me into getting into professional motor racing. So I did a first couple of years out of university. I worked on finite element analysis, which was quite new, and Imperial College was a lead-in finite element analysis. So it wasn't aerodynamics at all; it was structures.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons to do it, aeronautical engineering, is because it is aerodynamics and fluid dynamics, but it's also lightweight structures, which are very applicable to racing cars. And so I worked in the nuclear power industry to start off with. Yeah, it's basically back then all of the power plants were designed to a code, the ASME code. And when components couldn't satisfy the ASME code for space constraints or manufacturing defects, we used to analyze the problems in finite element analysis, so we could calculate the stresses much more accurately than you could do with pen and paper and the old way of doing it. And so we used to do the fatigue analysis on them. And so, but I'd always wanted to get back into racing, so I was always looking for jobs. And March Engineering had a job for an aerodynamicist, and I went up there. Robin Hood, who owned the company, interviewed me. And at that time, he wanted to get into rallying, not professionally, as an amateur, yes, in his spare time. And so the two things just fitted together. He could get me for cheap. I could do the wind tunnel testing, develop the wind tunnel testing. And I was his co-driver in rallies on the weekends. And I used to help prepare his car during the week. And Robin at the time was a tax exile. So he spent a lot of time in Jersey. And the great thing for me was that he allowed me to use his rally cars on the weekends he wasn't in the country. And yes, have new tires and, properly built engines and things like that, which of course I'd never had before.
That must have been really exciting.
Yeah, it was very exciting. Unfortunately, it made me understand that I wasn't as good a driver as I thought I was.
Oh.
And so after about 3 years, it dawned on me that maybe I should give up on the driving and concentrate on the engineering.
Are a lot of engineers drivers have you found that? I mean, it seems like it would really add something to the experience, but
it really does. And a lot of them, some of them have competed at extremely high levels. Some of them have just competed as, teenagers, go-karting. But I always encourage anybody who wants to get into motor racing to actually compete, because just teaches you the race doesn't wait for anyone. If you're not ready when the race starts, tough luck. There are other ways of getting into racing. Formula SAE is a very popular way of students trying to get into racing, but it doesn't have that immediacy, that time constraint that you get when you actually race yourself. It's more artistic. It's not all about the fastest lap time. It's more about how you approach the problem and got to solve a problem. But in racing, that race, if you're not ready for that race, you're not going to do very well in that race. It doesn't matter how elegant your design is to get there. It's got to be done and manufactured and on the car in that time constraint.
Yeah, it seems like there would be something about being in the car and that experience of needing to find solutions in a particular time frame that you can't really express, I guess, logically or with data or math or whatever that would give you something.
So obviously we have lots and lots of data, and I'm a bit out of date on what everybody can do with data these days, which is massive. When you're talking to the driver and he's expressing what he's feeling in the car, for sure, I think it's very good to have somewhat felt the same forces on your own body at some point, because then you can actually equate things very closely. So I was very close with the late Dan Weldon, and we used to go on and on and on about the experiences and the equivalencies of what they were feeling to other vehicles that we'd driven in our lifetime.
Yeah, from being in the world a little bit and talking to people, it sounds like from the beginning you also had the relationships you were having with the people you were working with were also important, and there's some kind of understanding there maybe that also helps to create this
massive interact. It's a very human environment to be in. Different people are motivated in different ways. Things happen in people's lives that you have to try and understand and empathize with. When some people need an arm around the shoulder, some people need a finger pointed at them, and when you're trying to get the best out of people, and you have to sort of understand and empathize. If you have a problem at home, if the workplace is not empathetic to that, you're not going to get the best out of the people within a race team. And it is definitely, everybody looks at the driver all the time, but it is very much a team sport. Everybody, the pit stops have to be spot on. The guy setting the tire pressures has to have pride and want to get everything right. And the mechanics have to be observant with all of the technology we have. They still have to be very observant as they're working on the race cars, and they have to feel that they can come and report things that they're seeing and maybe not make it look small or anything about it. And so you want them to report their observations, because one of those observations is going to catch something which is going to put you out of a race one day.
Yeah, I think when we look at teams and we look at the history of them, there's a real atmosphere around that's created by that team. I mean, you're, in a way, the brand becomes somehow all of those interactions. But I often think it's very hard to be the one risking your life in the car. The drivers are incredible. We all know this. But at the same time, for me, when I think of it personally, I almost think I would rather be, if I'd had the skills, right? I'd rather be the driver than the person who's responsible for all those little tiny things that could go wrong in the car when the driver is driving it. Do you know what I mean? Because there's this kind of pressure or stress that maybe it's just the kind of person I am, but that seems even incredibly heavy, that you're responsible for not only for someone else, but also, of course, for the other people on the track and so on and so forth. Is that something that people think about, or they can't think about? Or
so it's something, the danger aspect of it, you always have to have in the back of your mind, but you mustn't dwell on it too much. So you've always got to realize that every change that you make on a car could be dangerous, but if you dwell on it too much, you will end up with PTSD. So yeah. It's a stressful environment that you want to keep it in an envelope. An example is, so now I work for the sanctioning body. I don't work for a team anymore.
Right.
But when I was a technical director at Andretti Autosport, I would never look at anybody else's accidents. So I'd never watch the replays. I would just shut myself off to other teams' accidents. Our own accidents, yes, we'd always investigate them to make sure that there wasn't something that we didn't do correctly or something that we could improve on to make sure that doesn't happen again. All the other accidents, you have to just shut your mind to and just not dwell on them. Now I'm on the sanctioning body side. Of course, we investigate every accident down to the minutest detail that we can. Because of course we want to make sure that there might be something that can be altered on the car or the way we operate to prevent that happening again, or to prevent something else from happening. So that was quite a new avenue to me when I moved here. Like the first couple of years that I was at IndyCar, I really found it difficult. I didn't look at any of the accidents, but then there were a few things that happened that I felt that we could have avoided those things happening, and that I needed to get involved. And so that was quite a change.
That's a huge adjustment. I mean, I want to get at that too, how you went from those two different worlds. But just first, I can imagine from my own point of view why I wouldn't want to watch the crashes, because once I've seen something, I feel like it's more like possible or something, and it stays with me. But why wouldn't want to watch the other crashes? Was it just that you don't want to know about those alternatives, or it's just too much like overload, so it's better to focus
So,
your parameters?
yeah, so you have to understand that your focus is on going faster than everybody else and winning races. When you're on a team, it's not necessarily your responsibility to make everything safer. In fact, sometimes it's not even in your control. So like in IndyCar, it isn't in your control because you don't actually design the cars.
Did you get the kit?
So you have to, if you dwell too much on the accidents, you won't push the envelope right to
Okay,
the limit, and you won't win races.
I see.
When you move to the other side to be on the sanctioning body, suddenly it's not about making the car the fastest car anymore. It's about
Right,
making it the safest car. Now,
right. So,
when
yeah, you're sort of
previous to me coming into IndyCar, when I was involved in race car design, you have both sides of it. You've got to try and make sure you make your race car as safe as you can, but predominantly you make it as fast as you can, and to pass the regulations. So unfortunately, in most cases, a safe race car is a slower race car.
Yeah, it's interesting this dynamic, right? I mean, I guess in a way everyone's sort of checking and balancing everyone else. So that's kind of how that whole system works in a way. But it is fascinating to me. Maybe we can link this back just to the design and aerodynamics itself, that the relationship between wanting to design something that will be incredibly fast. I mean, hard to even imagine what those speeds actually are if you haven't gone at those speeds. And then there's that whole element of the parameters of safety. So early on, did you study those kind of relationships, form and function, and like how did you get all those themes together, or does racing just do that?
So in university, you really just design function, and you'll notice that in racing formulas where the rules are pretty open. So let's say you're just given like the original racing car rules were always like you were given a width, a height, a weight, minimum weight, and you design whatever you can within those parameters. Most of those cars weren't actually very pretty because, ironically, um, when you're trying to create downforce and minimum drag or efficiency, quite ugly slab-sided vehicles can actually be the most effective. And then there's been that transition now into more specifications trying to make things prettier, which has come from the marketing side.
Yeah.
So let's take the Indy Car, which we did a body kit in 2018. That was actually designed with style and function together. So we spent a lot of time. We had some artists involved, and obviously we had targets because we had to hit certain lap speeds and certain performance numbers. But we could push and pull and adapt the rules to try and make it quite an attractive car while hitting, at the speedway, qualifying at 230 miles an hour average lap speed over 4 laps, which is what we do here. So you need to get the downforce and the drag right, otherwise that's not going to happen. So that was really the first car that I was involved with, which really was not just, here are the regulations, make it as fast as you can make it. And that's morphed over into other series now. So LMTH hypercars, they're basically now given windows that they can have their downforce and their drag within, and then the stylists can try and put their own look on it so that the cars have the look of the manufacturer that is entering those cars.
Is
And
that
then they,
where that's coming from? Mostly the manufacturers wanting to have the brand style? Is that, or
yeah,
is it more for attracting audiences or both or?
well, at the end of the day, the manufacturers are involved in racing to sell cars. So if they can have their brand identity on the car rather than just a sticker saying Honda or Chevrolet, if
Mm-hmm.
they can actually have some, the headlamps and the tail lamps and carry their sort of like signature styling over, or
Mm-hmm.
the grille on the front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're more likely to get involved in a series that's
Yeah.
like that.
More personalized.
And that's why they, in Le Mans and sports GTP racing over here, they have the balance of performance to try and make sure all the cars go about the same speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if you can do this, but I wonder if you could help us really understand what are you really doing when you're trying to design a race car? I mean, if you had to take three parameters, aside from safety, just talking about the speed. So it's basically the force. Well, I mean, what would you say? What are you really trying to nail down, like
Yeah,
specifically?
mo most race cars are dominated by downforce, so that's pushing the car down into the track,
Yep.
pushing the tires into the track surface, because that's how you get grip. Drag efficiency does come into it, so you can't just add downforce at inefficient amounts of drag, because um, on slow tracks you're probably okay with that, but then on the faster tracks you'll be too slow down the straight. So those are the two main parameters. And then for the people who are designing the rest of the car, getting down to whatever the sanctioning body allows as the minimum weight is very, very important.
So
Um,
yeah, for something like IndyCar, I mean, maybe are there other races where you have so many three different kinds of tracks and yeah, I mean, is it how do you design when you know that the car can be on in such different situations, turning left or right, or the oval, or the street, or
Yeah, so IndyCar has the out of all racing probably has the biggest operating window. So obviously we run on road and street tracks like Long Beach.
hmm
Um, Tracks in the USA, a lot of them tend to be very bumpy. We run on some very, very smooth tracks like Laguna Seca, Road America, Barber Motorsports Parks, very,
mm
very smooth. But we have to have decent amount of suspension travel and suspension compliance, because we go to Detroit, race on the streets of Detroit. We're very, very bumpy. But then we also race on the ovals. So we have the short ovals, which if you're given free rein on a short oval, you're just going to put as much downforce on the car as you can possibly pile onto it. Because let's take Iowa, it's like 7/10 of a mile. It's a very short track. And
hmm
then we go to the Pièce de la Résistance, which is the Indianapolis 500,
right,
where, as I said, you have to do in qualifying, it's a 4 lap average speed, so it's 10 miles. The car is trimmed out in qualifying as much as you can, because you just want to be as fast as you can, but you
hmm
have to have just enough downforce. With on brand new tires, you can just about hold the car wide open uh, on those 16 corners that you do. So by the end of the qualifying run, the tires have been used up so much that if you ever put them back on the race car again, doesn't matter what you do, the car's going to feel terrible. Yeah, all of the
amazing.
molecules have been torn to shreds inside the tire. And that's how you get the fastest qualifying. The race is quite different. The race, a lot of traffic, a lot of dirty air. You have to now add the right amount of downforce, but you don't want to have too much downforce because it will have drag associated with it. So you've got to jockey for position for like 450 laps to try and make sure you're at the front end, let's say the top four going into that last 50 miles. And then it's just a banzai, flat out race to the finish. And if you have too much drag at that point, you won't win the race. So we actually have mechanic adjustable front and rear wings at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So on the pit stops, you can actually trim or add downforce a little bit. I think we're the only racing series in the world that allows the rear wing to be adjusted like that by in the race by the mechanics. We don't have DRS, but and honestly on the ovals we don't have push to pass either. So it's a very pure form of racing.
What's it like to win? When you've worked hard on a car and the car wins, what's the feeling like? Is it just like on to the next one? Is it a team feeling?
This is of course the reason that you're in this business is to win. It is great to win. You feel that you've achieved everything. All the hard work you put into it is now justified. But I think Ron Dennis at McLaren said it once. It's harder to lose than it is to win. Like losing is a great disappointment. Winning is what you should do. And that sounds awful. I know it sounds awful, but that's been my feeling all the way through life. I feel I like winning because I don't like the bad feeling I get when I don't win.
I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like an avoidance of the loss. That's the best part of the win.
Yeah. Like I expect to win.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to the mindset thing that we were talking about. There's something about all this that you can't like decipher the code, but there's a kind of mental, emotional, physical stance that that's part of it.
I think that's an engineer talking there. We're talking numbers and facts and stuff like that. I think it's very different for the driver because their adrenaline and they get a lot of euphoria out of it. So whatever the chemicals in your body that drive that is what they go through, and I'm sure they're very, very emotional when they win. I think the mechanics feel that emotion a lot more as well because I think they have they go over the wall and they do put themselves in danger in pit stops.
Yeah.
And so they get that euphoric high. Us engineers, we're looking at numbers all the time. So we got graphs, we have the telemetry spitting back numbers and lines at us, and we're looking for something that's going wrong and all the time. And so at the end of it, it's a relief, I suppose, at that point, as opposed to the euphoria that maybe the drivers and the mechanics feel a bit more.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you ever driven a car though on one of the tracks? Do you?
No, not in the USA, and I don't think I would ever be capable of driving an Indy car. I hear that they're very difficult to drive.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know what's your opinion. Why is the Indy 500 the race?
It is, frankly, it is. You need to come and watch it. You need to come to Indianapolis. We talked earlier about the speed of the cars. You go down to turn one, inside or outside the track, and watch them go through that corner. And I've been coming here since the 80s, and I go down there every event, and my jaw drops every time I go down there. It just does not look like it is possible for them to get around that corner at that speed. It's spectacular. It's just absolutely spectacular. And then on television, the track looks quite wide, but when you're here and you see cars go down the straight at 230 miles an hour, three wide, you are absolutely convinced that they cannot do it. Like, it just does not look that it is possible to do. It's definitely a practice race qualifying that's better to see in person than it is on television.
But that's one of the best answers I've heard because I haven't heard anyone say that before of where it feels like it's not possible, but there you are witnessing it being possible. That feeling is a special feeling. I can
And
imagine.
it's also you don't get the feeling on television, but when the race starts and there's 380 or 400,000 people and they all get
Oh,
up off their seat and start cheering, spine tingling. It's a spine tingling sensation.
yeah, it's a special, just visceral experience, and it has
Yeah,
a history too, doesn't it? I mean, it's from the beginning of racing. Really, we can
yeah.
trace it.
I can't remember what year we're up to now. We must be at about 107
Oh,
Indianapolis
yeah. Wow.
500. And that it's not been going for 107 years. It's been going for longer than 107 years because obviously Second World War it didn't
Mm-hmm.
happen.
Mm-hmm. A lot of pauses in there.
Period where the race got cancelled. So yes, it's been
Can
going
you
a long, long
do you
time.
still feel that spirit is like still there, and does it continue? Because I think it can be easy sometimes to get down on racing. Oh, it's like all commercial now or whatever, and or it's too hard, it's too much pressure, and but then at the same time, of course, people love it more than ever. But um, do you think
So
there's a continuity still?
yes, so the Indianapolis 500 has managed to keep let's put it, it's managed to keep its feet on the ground. So, let's take Formula One racing when we race here at Miami and Vegas and stuff like that. It's priced so high, even Silverstone, priced so high now that normal people are not really going to races. You've
Mm-mm.
got to be massive enthusiastic, or you've got to be very, very rich.
Yeah.
The Indianapolis 500, you go up into the stands in turn four, and they're regular people. They're regular people. They're out having fun on a sunny afternoon. They got their coolers. Some of them are seriously into racing. Some of them are less
Mm-hmm.
seriously into racing. So, take my wife as an example. I could get her into the suites and
Mm-hmm.
do the hobnob inside of it. She always wants me to get her tickets up in turn four with
Oh, great.
regular people. She said it is just so much fun being up there with people. They might be farmers from Illinois, they might be McDonald's workers in Chicago, they might be all sorts of walks of life, and most of them have been just coming, for whole families have come and they just keep coming because you don't have to take out a second mortgage to
Mm,
bring a family of six.
right.
So grandparents, grandchildren, uncles, aunts, they make it a day out and they're just having a lot of fun and they're watching some great racing.
Yeah, there's something about that, just the pure enjoyment of it. I used to, a partner of mine was a musician, and you get in this little world of access, I guess, is the thing. But
Mm-hmm.
the best experience is to just go out into the crowd and be in that. So I
Singing
guess
and
it's,
dancing along.
yeah, yeah, just let go, you know.
Yeah,
I think it's probably similar with the racing, but
it's
so okay, you are to talk about access. I mean, you have the kind of access that people dream of, right? I mean, if we had time to follow your career and all of the famous, like, I mean, basically you've been in racing history behind the scenes of it. So how many winning races were you part of at Indy? Over 100, right? I think there was like six Indy 500 victories with your designs. You definitely have real access, but we still don't know how you got there. How did you get from even Imperial Colony or working in the UK to IndyCar?
so when I got the job at March Engineering as an aerodynamicist, the March Engineering at the time had the majority of the cars in the field of the Indianapolis 500, so it was their main income vehicle. And so I joined March Engineering in probably April, May of 1984. I worked for Adrian Newey, who was our chief designer back then. He's now the Red Bull chief designer. He's gone on to have the most stellar career that you could ever imagine. And it was clear at the time that It was
Yeah.
going to be absolutely exceptional.
If you could map all your relationships, the people that you've met over your life, and it's basically a map of racing. But anyway.
Yeah, well, it's at the end of the day, it's still quite a. I'm sure it's like the music industry. It's quite a closed world once you get in.
Yeah.
People move around and go from place to place, and typically once you get into racing, very few people leave because it's very difficult to get into.
Mm-hmm.
So I came over to Indianapolis. My first race year was 1986. I'd never race engineered a car before. Robin Hurd asked me to come over, race engineer a car. I had no idea what I was doing. Like
Sometimes it's the best way to start, though.
And then you start to get to know people. People are typically friendly within the business. You have to ask for help. You get to know all of the people on the other teams. The following year, I was seconded to one of the works teams over here, so that would be 87. Again, I did go back to the UK, again, still working for Robin Hood. So I worked for Robin from 1984 to 1995 under various things. We went back and he got a deal to do Formula One cars. So we did Formula One from 91 through 94. And eventually I just had, I sort of had better contacts over here. Formula One was starting to get to be very, very large teams, becoming more like aerospace.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons I wanted to get out of, let's call it mainstream engineering, was it took so long for anything that you were involved with to actually get manufactured and get produced and tested and brought into production. And racing at the time was, we were doing new cars every season. So it was a fast moving, exciting business to be in. And then I came back to the US in 95. I was commuting from the UK and it just made sense. I moved to a team called Green, which was the owner of that team had been the manager of the team that I worked with in 87. And with my family, my boys were, I think in 99, they were 8 and 11. It just was a real good time just to move. They wanted me to move to the United States. Good time for them to move to the United States, and we moved over, and we've been here ever since.
And mostly in IndyCar. I mean, you had a few.
So yeah, obviously at March, back when we were designing cars, we did GTP, Group C, IndyCar, Formula 3000. We even did what would be considered the first stylized car, which was with AJ Foyt and General Motors and Oldsmobile. We did a closed circuit record car, which was, the GM stylist said we wanted to look like this, and you've got to make it create the downforce and the drag to be able to beat the world closed track record speed. Bit of Formula One, as I said, from 91 to 94. Very enjoyable period. Small group. We designed the car with about 8 engineers, subcontracted all the manufacturing of it. Worked firstly with Metal in Italy, and then subsequent years with Larousse in France. Great, really nice working with French people.
You were with
enjoyable.
Porsche a little bit too, right? Or
Porsche on the Indy Car in 89 and 90. And then that was the 90 was a good example of probably being too ambitious with the race car. And then came back, and since 1990 I've been kart back then was Lola's and Reynards. You bought your production racing cars, and then it's morphed into what's more of a single spec car. Although in IndyCar people like to say it's spec, but there's a lot of things that teams can actually do to make their cars better. It's
like
probably outside of Formula One, it's the next most open racing formula in the world, I think.
Oh, that's interesting. Somehow the constraints open up new freedoms, I guess, or not constraints, but the
It's more optimization than it is fundamental design. So you're not allowed to necessarily make new parts, but you're allowed to optimize a lot of the parts that you can buy. So all of the parts are optimized to, I think we have some of the highest efficiency gearboxes in the whole world because speedway over the road, you don't want any drag from your gearbox. So the gearbox supplier is actually flabbergasted at some of the efficiencies the teams have managed to get.
Yeah, it's actually like a big lab, isn't it? Is
Yeah,
that how you came up with the heat exchanger, the micro?
the
Was
micro
that kind of
heat
part of
exchanger.
that? Mm-hmm.
Well, so when I was at Andretti, in the previous iterations of cars, the heat exchangers were free.
Oh.
So they were allowed to do whatever you want. They had to be exactly the same size, same length, same height, but you were allowed to have custom heat exchangers. And it was interesting because Les McTaggart was the sort of technical director at IndyCar at the time, and he got approached by this company, Mezzo Technologies, and I think he wanted to get rid of them. He just told them to call me. At Andretti, and I spoke with the president of the company. It's a very small company at the time, and everything he said just made sense thermodynamically. So big part of aeronautical engineering is thermodynamics.
Yeah.
And so I convinced Michael to spend some money to build some prototypes, and we set out a very, very tight protocol for them to go through testing, making subscale heat exchangers, how we wanted them tested. And again, very short period from I think October until May, they were in the race cars at the Indianapolis 500 the following year.
Yeah, it was almost like it was just waiting for that, right?
Very, very efficient, slightly on the heavy side, but I think the company is now at the point where they can fix that problem. And very sustainable because they last forever. So because normal heat exchangers have fins, the aluminum fins tend to get bent and damaged, and debris can get into them. These heat exchangers can last 10 times as long as a conventional heat exchanger.
Yeah, they're incredible.
And
I think one of those little gems that changed things in a way that was so seamless, you just take it for granted, I guess.
yeah.
We don't have much time left, but you were talking about sustainable. So I do actually want to ask you about, there's been like the hybrid Indy kind of introduction, and this, of course, everyone now talking about trying to shift towards more ecological motoring. And I wonder how you've seen that develop, or just if you have any thoughts about it, or.
So I'm a great believer in the right to repair. I think we've got into this throwaway world now, especially with plastics. We're just making things. I saw something the other day, sort of a tongue-in-cheek Twitter out there where the guy says, I go to the supermarket and I order some ham and they put it in a plastic bag. Then, I go and buy pop in an aluminum tin and whatever, but I can't get a plastic carrier bag to take my produce home. And it's true, because my wife and I, we go through it all the time. I say, hey, we used to get things in paper and glass, and you just can't do it now. We pick on little things, but we're not attacking the main problem. And for me, the main problem is we have to reduce plastics, for sure, but making things last longer. I honestly believe that it's just better for the world if we don't throw things away as regularly as we do, and we try to repair things. And so I try to, at home, I repair everything. Like I'm Like I just don't throw anything away. I think the same thing applies to racing cars, and people don't seem to realize it. So I'm going to have a throwdown on Formula One here, but they build new racing cars every year. The racing cars are made out of mostly not very environmentally good products, so carbon fiber, which is resin impregnated, magnesiums, just all sorts of not such nice materials. And although this was not really done intentionally within IndyCar, because it was done more for economic reasons, to try and keep our car count up. If we don't change our car every year, it makes it less expensive for the teams. And I think you've seen that in our car count. We now have 27 full-time entries, which is great for our racing product, because people, when they go to watch a race, they want to see race cars. Mm-hmm. So the more cars you can put on track, the more they're having cars go past them. But I think one of the things that people miss out on is that although our monocoque or safety cell, technically you could be running one that was produced in 2000 for the 2012 racing series still, they haven't degraded in any way because of the materials. And the safety cell, although maybe aesthetically people will like to see it change shape, it is just a bracket for the driver to sit in. The most important part of it is that it is safe for the driver to be enclosed in this cockpit. And having it such that the teams don't have to buy new ones of those every year just has to be so good for the environment, because there's nothing you can do with them once you can't recycle them like you can steel and aluminum. It's plastic. So I'm really you get a lot of fans who want the cars to look different every year, but it really doesn't improve the show. It doesn't improve sustainability. The other thing that you might not realize is that our cars do run on 100% renewable ethanol.
Oh, I didn't know that. All the 100%. Wow.
IndyCar has been running on ethanol probably since about 2004. I think previous to that, they were running on methanol. So in my career, an IndyCar has never, ever run on gasoline.
Whoa, that's sort of blowing my mind for a second.
So the original ethanol was a corn-based ethanol, which obviously people are saying that takes away from the food chain.
Yep.
But now it's 100% renewable ethanol, so it's made from food byproducts, so like the stalks and the stems and the leaves, and I don't know the exact details of it, but it's produced by Shell and it's 100% renewable.
Wow, that's spectacular. I did not know it's 100%. I'll have to really check into that and maybe even do a show about that, because that's really.
Yeah, it's a well-kept secret.
Yeah. Unfortunately. Yeah. I really like what you were saying about the not throwing things away. That's really like a mental shift, I feel like, that we all need to have to I think it can come too from, like you did as a kid, working on the car and like having this physical relationship to the parts and realizing that they mean something. This can also kind of add to the cars, even in IndyCar, if you understand that car has history and those parts, it's like continuity. I just wanted to say that, but the last question is,
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead first.
I think certain things do get to the point where they're not economical to repair, and we have to accept that. And when we replace them, we should be trying to replace them with higher efficiency, longer lasting. We're in the disposable razor, disposable pen world, and I think we need to try and back down from that and go back into making things such that people can repair them and make them last longer. I really, that's important.
Exactly. And it's kind of exciting if you can repair something yourself. It's kind of, I mean, you were saying IndyCar did this for not only like the choice of ecological and sustainable motoring, but actually those things don't have to be separate, right? Like we can make these choices that are economically good for us, and actually
Mhm.
they can be very enjoyable too, and very like we can find new ways of having relationships with our
And, and
engineered machines, you know?
and sometimes it's just easier to design things which you can throw away. It takes a lot more thought and a lot more effort to um, design things that are easy to work on, rather than they clip together once, and once they're done, you have to like break the clips to try and get in there, and you're never going to fix it again. So it's the same thing we have with race car design. You're always trying to make something as fast as and as light as you can, but you've also got to make it such that the mechanic can get in to change the components and or to adjust the components. Very easy to make it such that it's almost impossible for the guy to do that. Much harder to make it such that it's functional so you can do it quickly. And at the end of the day, you have to think of both, because our sessions only last 30 minutes or an hour, and you need to be able to get through a number of adjustments. If you can't adjust the car, you can't learn how to make the car work best with the tires. So I just think we need that mindset going back to how things can be repaired rather than just replaced.
Exactly. And it is a bit of a mind shift if people understood that is kind of a real genius if you can design something that can be repaired and can be understood. Maybe just even shifting to understand that kind of respect for design and engineering in a different way changes things a bit too. But I wonder, just like to end, when you think about forever motoring, because that's the name of this podcast, I mean, what's it meant in your life for you motoring? And like, how do you see, and by motoring, I mean with electric motoring, with any kind of biofuel, with like what, however we're going to move. What do you think of this forever motoring? Is it always a part of us?
I think the motor car or something similar as a form of transport is going to be forever with us? Yes, or certainly for the next few generations. There is an element of freedom to motoring. Where do I see it going? Where would I like to see it go?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd like to see governments set targets rather than set requirements. So I'd like to see them come up with a way of assessing, CO2 from, birth to the death. So the whole life cycle of a car, what what the target is for various things, CO2, whatever, and then let engineers actually work out what is the best way, and entrepreneurs work out what is the best way to achieve those targets, as opposed to saying all cars must be electric. Because I think at the end of the day, I think we know that that is probably not going to happen. Um, is it a good target? I honestly do not know. I hear all the stories. Some people say the batteries are very dirty, and what do you do with them? Blah 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 blah. But I see very few um, proper scientific/engineering studies to back up all of these claims one way or the other. The pro petrol people like to throw down on the batteries. The pro battery people like to throw down on oil and gas and everything else. And I'd just like to see better studies done and set the targets, and let industry work out what is the best way to get to those targets. Because then I think you're going to get innovative solutions, which right now I don't think people are necessarily working towards innovative solution. They're just working to what they've been told to do.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, because if you say you have to be electric or you have to go off fuel, then already you've set parameters that those are the choices. When if there was a bigger goal, maybe there's something we haven't imagined yet that's not
Right.
electric or, you know.
Absolutely. And I think, the diesel thing, Europe latched onto diesel and gave big incentives for diesel all over Europe. And then suddenly they decided, well, now diesel's banned. So who made that decision in the first place, and whoever didn't put enough research into that decision. So I think the research into the decisions is important. Or whoever sets the parameters needs to be part of a very intelligent group to set the parameters. But once you set the parameters, let industry go out and actually try and beat each other
Yeah.
to achieve those parameters.
We have come to think in these very strict terms that it's either electric or it's traditional ICE, internal combustion engine, which there's probably millions of other options. And the truth is, any one thing, if you really look at the research, any one thing, only that thing is going to have trouble. So
the problem is that, as we see, is sometimes the best ideas don't win because there's other things like infrastructure and cost of infrastructure. So, we're going through it with electric now, which is charging stations, and it's a lot more charging stations, and governments do have to get involved at that level because industry itself won't finance it. So
we definitely need structure, scaffolding.
It's complex. It's very complex.
Yeah,
but
it is.
I'm pretty sure that I think we like the independence of being able to go where we want to go. That's probably not going to go away unless we can create some very nice virtual reality rooms where I could be here thinking I'm on the beach in Mexico.
Which we probably can. I mean, you've probably seen a lot of simulation changes in terms of the motorsport.
There's virtual reality is quite interesting, but it's still got a long way to go.
Yeah, it does. And we do like to move in the real world too. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your career and all the motoring you've provided and given, also providing some of what we were just talking about, more of the structure and the scaffolding, which is important too. And yeah, I'm going to think about that biofuel thing.
Yeah, just do a little research, and Shell make it. So they're a little bit. I think they keep some of the secrets about what they're doing, but they say it's 100% renewable. So I think we're one of the first racing series to get to that.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, that's big news. All right. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. You too. Be well.
Bye.